The majority of people who step outside of their marriage and into an affair don't get there overnight, they get there over time. And in that process, they inevitably finding themselves stepping over some lines or stepping through some doorways that separate a platonic friendship from a romantic, emotional, or physical affair. In this video, I want to talk about 3 lines that people cross on their way from a platonic friendship into an affair. That's today on RelationShots. Hey, welcome to RelationShots. If you have not already downloaded your free guide to intimacy, you'll see a link in the description area below. What this is a guide that helps you evaluate 4 areas of intimacy in your relationship: physical, spiritual, recreational, and emotional, and gives you some practical ideas of how you can increase connection in those areas. All right, so let's talk friendship and affair. More specifically, how a platonic friendship often leads to an emotional, romantic, or physical affair, and how to avoid it. Now, some of you I know would say, oh, I already got the solution. Don't have friends of the opposite sex. Boom, problem solved. We're done. I don't even have to deal with it. And if that's you, awesome, go for it. If you wonder what my thoughts on that are, I have a video I've posted years ago that I'll tag at the end of this on should you have friends of the opposite sex when married. You can get my thoughts on that. But here's the reality. A lot of married people have friends of the opposite sex. And a lot of married people have jobs where they work in close proximity with people of the opposite sex. So I think it's important for us to know what lines often get crossed in the process of a platonic friendship becoming an emotional, romantic, or physical affair. Because if we recognize them, then hopefully we can get off the path before we ever get there, right? Because this is a process. It doesn't happen overnight outside of, yes, I get the exceptions, the one night stand, someone was at the bar and they drank and they hooked up with somebody. But that's not the majority of affairs. The majority of affairs are people who started as friends, and at some point that friendship morphed and changed into something else, and next thing you know, they find themselves in an affair. So if we're going to avoid that, I think we got to recognize some of the lines we cross, and the hope is that if we can recognize some of these lines, that we can get off the road or the path towards that affair and set healthy boundaries and protect our marriages. So what I want to do in this video is give you 3 red lines, or you can call them thresholds, or you can call them doorways, that people often cross or walk through in the process of a platonic friendship becoming more and eventually becoming an affair. And this is based on the work of Dr. Shirley Glass, who is one of the leading experts in infidelity. So the first red line a lot of people often pass is emotional intimacy. Now, if you don't have predetermined boundaries around what you will talk about and what you won't talk about with your platonic friendships, your opposite sex friendships, you are in much greater danger of beginning to get to a place where you're sharing your friendship, your connection is becoming emotionally intimate, and oftentimes it's happening at the expense of your marriage. So if you find yourself sharing some of the areas of your life, your hopes and your dreams, your fears, your personal and emotional struggles, your frustrations at work, your difficulties with parenting, and at some point you start sharing your struggles of your marriage with your platonic friendship, you are finding yourself on a road towards emotional intimacy. And at some point, when you are sharing about your marriage with your friend, rather than actually being at home working on the issues with your spouse, you are heading in the wrong direction. You are actually building emotional intimacy with your friend, and at the very same time that you're building more emotional intimacy with your friend, you are robbing your marriage of that emotional intimacy because we're not having the same conversations with our spouse that we need to, and instead we're having them with our friends. And so we begin developing this emotional intimacy with our friend. Now, here's what I would acknowledge. In every friendship, there is some level of emotional intimacy. That's part of friendship. We are sharing aspects of ourselves. We are learning and hearing aspects of them, but we've got to have some parameters and some boundaries. At what level are we willing to share with our friend, and what are the areas of our life, our deeper emotional needs that we need to reserve only for sharing with our spouse and not sharing with that friend? So the first line, the first doorway that we often walk through is emotional intimacy. And at this point, most of the time we don't even really recognize what's happening. And most of the time we don't even think this could be dangerous for our marriage, because in our mind it's a platonic friendship. We're just sharing. It's a safe place. They know me better than anybody. All the things you would tell yourself of why it's okay to share the things you're sharing with this person are also building a level of emotional intimacy that you may not recognize is connecting you more with that person, and at the same time disconnecting you with your spouse because you're not having those conversations at home. That's the first red line. The second red line that we often cross is secrecy. Now, secrecy is a slippery slope that gets steeper and steeper and has you moving faster and faster the longer you hang out in that place. You begin to develop a secret world well away from the responsibilities, the routine, the pressures, and everything that comes with an ordinary family. And then at some point you find yourself talking less about your friend at home and talking less about home with your friend. And then what happens is the secrecy begins to automatically intensify and fuel your preoccupation with one another. Where you get to a place where I'm not talking about this, I'm not really telling my friends nor my spouse how often we're meeting or the level of our discussions, which then fuels our preoccupation with it, so that when I'm not with a friend and I'm at home where I'm supposed to be, I'm actually preoccupied and thinking about the next time I get to have the discussion or be with my friend. And unconsciously, because I'm at home and my relationship with my spouse is preventing me from the secret relationship over here, I actually sometimes become consciously or unconsciously resentful towards my spouse because that relationship that I committed to is preventing me from enjoying the secret relationship that I have over on this side. And it fuels itself. And it fuels itself. So if you find yourself at a place where you used to talk about your friend with your spouse, but now the level of conversation, the discussions, and your thoughts around it have increased to the point you're not really bringing them up a whole lot at home or with your other friends, it is becoming secret. And the secrecy is actually fueling the feelings and intensity and the preoccupation with that person. And we're stepping over another line and through another door that is heading us quickly in the wrong direction. And a third line that we cross, and the doorway we walk through, is sexual chemistry. Now, we all know the forbidden actually increases our desire for something. And so long before a friendship becomes physically intimate, there's usually discussion and talk about the physical attractiveness or the sexual attractiveness between the two people. So at some point they begin sharing, or one of them shares something that they're attracted to the other person, they're sexually attracted to the other person. And then that kind of talk escalates. At some point, one of them is thinking about being sexual with the other one. They begin to talk about what it might be like to be sexual with one another, while at the same time, both mutually agreeing that we would never actually act on it because that would go against our standards and our values, right? So I'm talking about the fact that I'm thinking about and what sex with you might be like, but at the same time, I'm like, but I would never do that because we both know that's wrong, right? And so there is talk about it, but watch what happens. Discussing it while at the same time suppressing it only increases the tension and desire that we have. So we think we're being good by not doing it, but the fact that we're talking about it and talking about how we're not going to do it, all it is doing is adding fuel to the fire of us eventually wanting to do it. And at some point, when you're talking about it, saying how you're not going to do it, but you're thinking about it, which makes you talk about it, and the talking about it makes you think about it, at some point you do it. And that, my friends, is how somebody moves from a platonic friendship to a romantic, emotional, sexual affair with somebody else. Is we start with sharing, we walk through the door of secrecy, we start discussing sexual chemistry, and next thing you know, we've crossed enough lines and we've walked through enough doorways where we begin justifying why this thing is okay. And then once that happens, it confuses everything and we start questioning all our other relationships and wondering if this was the person and all the stuff that happens to us because we have crossed lines, we have walked through doors, and we have done that at the expense of the commitment we made to our spouse. Now, here's the deal. If you understand this, you can recognize this. And the good news is, if you recognize it and you're willing to set boundaries and do things, you can prevent yourself from ever getting there. So if you find that you are beginning to share some things that are deeper than what you should be sharing, and you're sharing them with your friend and not sharing them with your spouse, that is a time to set some boundaries, to back off a little of what you have been sharing, and to really be intentional and focus on, I need to share at home. And if that requires me to work through some tension and resolve some issues, because those issues and tension are what are preventing me from having the emotional intimacy and conversations I want at home, you need to step into that. You need to do the difficult work, and you need to mend the relationship so that you can increase the emotional intimacy here while decreasing the level of emotional intimacy with your friend. If you find yourself at a place where it's becoming secret and your friends and your spouse don't know how often you're talking or how often you're meeting with this person, what you need to immediately do is set some boundaries and move yourself back from that relationship, where instead of talking about your marriage over here, you're working on your marriage. And instead of not talking about the friendship and your people don't know about it, you need to talk to some people who are healthy, who could hold you accountable and who could support you about the secret friendship that you're allowing to fester and develop, so that you bring that thing into the light and it's going to lose some power. And if you find yourself at a place where you are talking about sex or your sexual chemistry, you need to immediately remove yourself from that relationship. Oh, but they've been friends forever and we only had that talk one time. I don't care. You crossed that line. You had that conversation. Those thoughts are now in both of your heads. You need to remove yourself from that kind of relationship. Now, again, this is a highway or pathway from friendship to affair. You don't fall off a cliff, it's a pathway. And the good news is, if you'll recognize it and you'll be willing to set some boundaries, maybe remove yourself some relationships, you should never find yourself at a place where you're in an affair wondering how you got there, because there were some clear signs along the way. So that, my friends, are 3 lines that we cross when a friendship turns into an affair. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Drop some comments if you maybe find yourself at one of these places, or you have recognized that in your life and have learned to turn back and avoid those things. Would love to hear your thoughts and comments on that. I'm going to tag the video right at the end of this video on should you have opposite sex friends when married. You can get my thoughts on that as well. And until next time, I'll see you right back here. Bye for now.